those of you who maybe don't know Lisa, Lisa has been kind of a foundation to Agile testing for a long time, working with Janet Gregory as they paired on writing 3 books. 3, right? Yes, I thought it was 3. I have the 3 of them. They're up there. But we're just so excited to have you here, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts around teams and automation and how teams can work together in automation and testing. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and turn off my video and let Lisa take over.
All right, let me get my slides going so I can share my screen. And it's a pleasure to be here. I really was honored to be invited. So can y'all see my slide there?
Yes.
All right, great. Though there is a Q&A thing in Zoom, if you need to ask a clarifying question, if I use a term you don't understand, or I don't want anybody to get confused as I go along or miss something, so feel free to, I'll ask Jenna to watch the chat or the Q&A. If anybody has a clarifying question, we can certainly stop and deal with that. And we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So, as Jenna mentioned, Janet Gregory and I have collaborated for a long time writing books about Agile testing, a video course, and we have soon to be 2 live training courses through the Agile Testing Fellowship that it can be done virtually or in person where that's possible, and both private in-house courses and public courses. So those are available if you go to agiletestingfellowship.com. And I'm also doing some consulting, quality practices assessments and things like that. And I live in Vermont with actually 4 donkeys. I really need to update that picture. I realize there are only 3 showing there. Oh, and I have a course on Test Automation University. If you haven't checked that out, there's so many wonderful free courses there, and they're not all about automation, actually. Some of them, Lucy Hawk has a really good one that's similar in topic to this on a whole team approach to tackling test automation. So what would I like you to learn from this? What do I hope you'll take away? I'm organizing my screen so I can see my notes and see the chat at the same time. I want you to find ways to help your team build a successful test automation strategy using visual models that are going to help you think outside the box, think laterally as well as vertically, not just think the logical step-by-step that we're so used to doing, but really being creative, brainstorming, and guide conversations to generate ideas for your test automation strategy. And not only the automated regression tests, but tests that guide development for technology facing and business facing type quality concerns, and there are lots of other things we can automate. So it's not only about the regression tests. Now, I've been on teams, at least one team, where we had thousands of automated UI level tests, as well as thousands of tests at unit and API level. This team was doing test-driven development. And the test-driven development was great. The API level tests were great, but the UI level tests were very poorly designed, and they just didn't catch bugs, and they were flaky. So it's not magic. It really takes concerted effort. Not, these tests were all written by the programmers who were writing production code. For some reason, they were great at writing production code, not so great at designing tests. We need everybody to work together. We testers who are great at specifying tests and designing tests. And database people can help us. Operations people can help us. So many people can help us get this effective test automation going. And I've listed some of the benefits here. It is a big investment. It is kind of difficult sometimes because business management may say, well, why are you spending so much time on that? But there are a lot of benefits to test automation, such as documenting our system, that are important to the business, and these do pay off. So we need the whole team involved. And again, when I worked, it was very nice that a pair of developers worked on a story and did test-driven development, and they automated tests at the API level if appropriate, and they did the UI tests as well. But when, for whatever reason, if they don't give the same care and attention to the test code as they do to the production code, it's not going to work. I've also been on teams where we testers automated all the tests, and yeah, we were okay at it. I was a programmer before, but when it's not your full-time job, you're not writing code 8 hours a day, we're not likely to be able to write as maintainable and effective code as somebody who writes code as their full-time job. So we need to work together. People who are good at specifying tests work together with people who are good at writing code. So, and we also need to really think about risks and what's valuable to the customer. We don't want to go off in the weeds. We can only focus on a few things. We have Joao Prince that did a keynote last year at Agile Testing Days on the paradox of choice. So we try to focus on more than about a half a dozen things at a time. It's just like, it's like if you're flicking through, you know, Netflix and there's so many shows you can't pick one. We had to pick the highest priority risks, the highest quality aspects that are valuable to customers, and focus on those. And when we have diversity, we're going to be more successful. So that's why it needs to be a whole team responsibility, just like everything related to building quality in. Now, Janet and I, our experience over the last, well, more than a couple decades, is that when we testers work together with the coders, we get a better result with our automated tests. That was our experience, but we couldn't back it up with data. Well, thank goodness for this data DevOps survey, which came up with that data over several years. They found that having automated tests created and maintained by the developers in collaboration with the testers resulted in reliable automated tests, and that correlates with high performing teams. So I highly recommend this book. There's a lot of good information. The test automation chapter is great, but so are all the other chapters. So especially if your team's trying to work towards continuous delivery, this is really, really important. So what gets in the way of successful test automation? There are lots of possibilities here, and I don't know where you all are in your team's automation journey. Maybe you've got some automation, but maybe it's taking up too much of your time, or it's missing your automated regression test, or missing bugs, or maybe you just don't have any. I've joined many teams that didn't have any automation when I joined them. So what gets in your way the most? And so I'm just going to give you a minute to think about that. And if you are willing to share in the chat, we'll see what different people have as obstacles to achieving their automation goals. I'm gonna actually set my timer. So what's in your way? Is it some mean manager that says, nope, don't take time for that, just do it all manually? Like that would be faster. Dependencies, yeah. Lack of support. Yeah, getting into a maintenance issue. No expectations, that's interesting. Not worth the effort because you got to update the tests, resources, time and money. Ways of working, interesting. Understanding what needs to be automated. Yeah, that gets right to the heart of it right there. It's an interesting observation. Okay, oops. Well, thank you for contributing those. I think those are all good ones. And as you see, these are the common ones I hear. And one of the biggest ones, design changes causing tests to be outdated. Yeah, those are big, big challenges. In this graph and this slide, it's Brian Merrick's hump of pain. So when you're learning to automate tests, whether it's, he did this in the context of test-driven development, where you're writing a little tiny test to describe the behavior of some tiny little piece of code and making that test pass by writing the code and continuing. That's test-driven development, which is more of a code design activity, but results in having automated unit level regression tests. But I found it applies no matter what level of test we're doing. It's hard to learn how to do it. It takes time and it's more work at first because you're not only writing the code and you're not only doing your manual testing, you're also trying to do this automation. And so you have to be able to really stick with it and have support of your management to take the time to learn, make that investment. And then you have a library of reusable components. You know what you're doing. You start to save effort, which you can spend on really important human-centric testing, such as exploratory testing. So it could take months. It could even take years to get the desired level of competence. So it's a big challenge. We just have to be aware, and somebody mentioned expectations. We have to be aware that it's not going to happen overnight, but we can tackle it step by step. So I like to use visual models to get the whole team, everybody on the team, whatever their specialty, talking about how are we going to solve these problems? How are we going to get over these articles? So let's look at a few of these, some of my favorite models. So some of you might be familiar with the test automation pyramid, and I actually worked for Mike back in 2003, 2004 when he first came up with this idea, and it's something that our team obviously applied. And so the idea is to push the teams to the lowest level that makes sense, because those unit tests and component level tests that don't go to the database, they don't go to other layers, they don't go anywhere external, they're just in the code. Those run really fast, give us the fast feedback. If we're doing test-driven development, we're learning how to do those, and that's our foundation of our pyramid. And then we need to test the other layers, that we need to test more of the application. So can we test at a service level or API level? We can test the business logic, things like that. And then workflow level, if we're working on embedded software or web applications, things that have a user interface, we have to go through all those layers. And then finally, we're going to have human-centric testing, like exploratory testing. So on our team back then, we're trying to, the developers are trying to learn test-driven development, which we had a lot of support and training for, but it took time. And meanwhile, we had all these manual regression checklists that we had to go through every time we released, every 2 weeks. So what we did as a team is everybody on the team got to experience the pain of doing the manual regression tests, which gave a lot of motivation for solving the automation problems. And I also, while they were learning to do test-driven development and automated at the unit level, I did just a smoke test of the things that were most, I went to the business and said, what absolutely has to work? Business stakeholders, and they told me what absolutely has to work. So we had just smoke tests through the user interface to cover those things, so that we didn't have to do the manual regression testing anymore. And then we gradually filled in the middle at the API and service level. So different ways to tackle it, but talking about the pyramid helped us come up with that strategy. Let's do the unit level, let's do some smoke tests at the UI level, and then once we're good with the unit level, let's tackle the service level. Now, a lot of people over the years, that was a long time ago, and a lot of people pick on Mike's model. They say, well, it's not a pyramid, it's a triangle, whatever. And people misinterpret it and think that you need to get that exact ratio for that perfect triangle. That's not what it's about. And so Seb Rose's triangle model says it a little bit more clearly. Let's look at the number of tests we have and how much of the application that test exercises. How many layers does it go through? Is it only at the unit level? Does it go to some external API endpoints? Does it go all the way to the database? How far does it go? And that's what we need to think about. And what are the appropriate tests that we need at the different levels? What's the minimum number of tests that we need to test the whole application? So this is another model I love. at Selenium Conference 2018, I was like, oh, so I did a talk on the love-hate relationship pyramid. And from his point of view, developers love writing those little unit tests. They're easy to write. They run fast. They give us great feedback. We know right away if we broke something at that level. They're very deterministic. But as you go up, they're harder to maintain. They're a little harder to write. Not a lot of people generally, I'm talking generally, really enjoy automating at the UI level, or particularly they don't enjoy having to maintain those tests or go investigate the failures. So this is just another way to look at it, which I think makes a lot of sense. We need all these tests, but let's focus on the ones we love as much as possible, and only do the other ones as needed. Katrina Kluge has a wonderful book, Practical Guide to Testing and DevOps, and she describes a bandpass filter model. No Assessment has a model like this, and other people do as well. The idea here is unit level tests catch tiny little bugs that are just in that little area of the code. They're not going to catch problems maybe between the database layer and the UI layer. So as we go through those layers, we're going to catch bigger and bigger bugs. And then guess what? Our test environments never look like production. We don't know what those customers are going to do in production. We can't test everything. So then we need the monitoring. We need the observability. We need the alerts to know when something goes wrong in production. So we have to really pay attention. So I like this because it's not just about the regression tests. It's also about our monitoring and observability in production, knowing what's happening and learning from that. Some of you might be familiar with the Agile testing quadrants model, originally from Brian Merrick, that Janet and I use a lot in our books. And this is going beyond regression testing and automation. It's a taxonomy. We know that there are lots and lots of different testing activities that we could do. So we think about the product level, we think about a feature level or a story level. What testing are we going to need to do to feel confident about putting that in front of customers? And the things in the quadrants here, listed in these different quadrants here, are just examples. So business facing tests that guide development, well, concrete examples of how a feature should behave. That's one example. Story acceptance tests, prototypes, those are all business facing tests that help us have shared understanding of what to build. And then the technology facing side, it's more the internal quality. What lets us as a team know that we have reliable code that's operable, that's testable. And then on the other side, critiquing the product. Once we've written the code, how do we evaluate whether it's going to satisfy, mitigate the risks that we know are out there, satisfy the customer's needs, solve their problems? And on the technology facing side, those are the things that business stakeholders probably take for granted, that we're going to have good performance and good security. But as a delivery team, we need to make sure that that's really true. There's no particular order for the quadrants. We number them in the books for ease of reference, but that confused people. If you're doing a new architecture, you might do performance tests first to make sure that architecture scales before you do any other testing. So it doesn't imply any order, but it's just to think about what are all the testing we need to do. Do we have the people to do those testing? Do we have the skills? Do we have in test environments? Do we have test data, etc.? So it helps us with the planning. And we can also track, we can fill in the quadrants with what tests we're going to do for a particular feature or story, and then check them off as we go. Now, there are a lot of variations on the test automation pyramid. Toyer Mamuji's triangle model is a great one. And, he reminds us again, test automation's not magic. You have to keep asking questions. And he has a great blog post on this, which I'll have in the resources at the end. So he did a model to try to help us think about the big picture. We got the front end, we got the back end, we got the user interface, we got the API, we're logging. And, people talk about shifting left, shifting right. Software development's not linear. And, that DevOps loop is a nice representation of its infinite nature. And Janet and I have the holistic testing model because all the way around that infinite loop, we're doing testing activities. And this is our holistic testing. And that's what Toyer's model is trying to remind us, to look at that big picture. Again, all these are thinking tools. They're not rules. They're not mandates. They may not fit your context. So they're just ways to get talking and asking those questions. Because QA means question asker, right? I got that from Pete Whalen. Seb Rose has his iceberg model. If you're doing behavior-driven development, acceptance test-driven development, specification by example, you're trying to take those concrete examples of desired behavior and turn them into executable tests. And the huge value of those tests is they document how the system behaves. If you need for business stakeholders or for people who can't read code to be able to read those tests, then you need to use a testing framework that has natural language that people can read, like Cucumber robot framework. You know, there are lots of examples. If not, then maybe you don't need those frameworks. So I worked on a team where we were developing a product for development teams, and all of our stakeholders were people who could read code. They were all had been developers, and so we didn't have to have business readable. I still would have preferred it. I found it easier to read Cucumber test than RSpec, but for us, RSpec was a better fit. Everybody could read those tests. They're in this. You had to look at the source code to read them, but it fit our context. So lots of different things to think about when you're choosing your test automation tools, your drivers and frameworks. And again, there's no right or wrong here, just a way to have conversations about what we need. So a lot of people quote George Box, all models are wrong, some are useful, and they're just thinking tools. They're just to help us talk. And our brains work better when we're, well, ideally, if we're moving around. I'm sitting here on my ball. If I bounce, my brain probably work better. When we're moving, when we're talking to each other, when we're using our hands. And so by using a visual model, even if your team is remote, you're using a virtual whiteboard, people are moving sticky notes around, they're drawing, they're writing. That's going to help your brain think better and think more outside the box, overcome our unconscious biases. So that's, to me, the real value of models, and getting the whole team together, make sure we have that diversity of viewpoints, perspectives, experience to come up with the best solutions. So I am curious, now that we've gone through these different models, do any of them seem like they'd be a fit for your team to at least give a try? Or do you have another favorite model that you use? Or would you really try to create your own? And again, if you don't mind sharing those in the chat, I'll give you a minute for that. Triangle model. Would that be the Toyer's triangle model, or oh, I didn't put Seb's on this card. We had Seb's, or not Seb's. Now I've forgotten who they all were. Toyer's. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of food for thought in that model. Any other ones that look interesting? I'm sorry if you can hear my dog barking, but they just got groomed. They're excited. Oh, the agile testing quadrants. Yeah. I love the agile testing quadrants. So they've helped my team so much over the years. Katrina's model, band pass filter model. Yeah, I like that one a lot too. I like it because it brings in the things on the right hand side of that DevOps loop: observability, monitoring, logs. Cool. Well, thank you all for sharing those. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about, I've given you all these models. How would you go about using them? I've talked a little about that, but let's talk some more about that. Again, bringing in people with different perspectives, product people, marketing, designers, as well as people on your software delivery team. Again, to help think outside the box. Unconscious bias is a powerful thing since it's unconscious. Even if we're aware we have them, it's hard to overcome them. I hope we all have different ones, So if we get a diverse group together, somebody's going to see something that I didn't see, or think of something I didn't think of, and we can all build on each other's ideas. I'm a big fan of test-driven development. It just provides such a solid foundation for quality. Behavior-driven development, acceptance test-driven development, guiding development with those business-facing tests. I'm a huge fan. I've seen the value of those over the years. And both of those involve automation. So again, it's not only regression test automation. Continuous integration, that requires automation. It's a very vital core practice. Continuous delivery, a lot of teams are moving towards continuous delivery and deployment. They have their workflow pipelines. So there's a lot of areas where automation comes in. So a lot of conversations we can have. And I like to just get started with visuals. If we were doing a workshop here, I'd put up a Miro board and have everybody start moving, start writing down, okay, here's our feature. What kind of tests do we need to do with this feature? Let's think about the risks that we have. Maybe we've already done a risk storming or something, or what's most valuable to the customer with this feature. And let's start planning our testing around that. And we can move those sticky notes around and say, what level do we want to do that testing? It's really powerful to do these things with either virtual or physical whiteboards and sticky notes. I think my dogs are eating lunch now. Seriously, sorry about the dog barking. And you're not going to start perfect. With a test automation pyramid, a lot of people talk about starting with an upside down pyramid or an automation ice cream cone. It's not wrong. There's no judgment in that. And it might work well in some contexts. If you're a legacy application or you don't have any test automation, you got to start somewhere. It may not be ideal. It's fine. Make your plan. What's your first step going to be? What's most important? And then what are your subsequent steps going to be? What can you experiment with? And whatever is shape it evolves into, that's the right shape for you right then. So again, none of these models mean you need exactly this percentage of unit level tests and this percentage of API level tests or whatever. That's not the goal. There are contexts where you really do need to automate more tests through the user interface level. I can see that. So lots of possibilities. I learned years ago from Linda Rising about small frugal experiments, and look on YouTube and find her talks about that. It's so important. There's so many ways teams can use these to improve and to work towards our goals. But thinking about it the short term, don't make a huge investment. Just think, what are we going to do for 2 weeks? We're not going to invest a lot of time in it. We're not going to invest a lot of resources in it, but let's see how it goes. Let's set a realistic goal for that time period and find some way to measure progress towards it, and work incrementally and iteratively, just like Agile development. That's how we work, right? Go to the business people, find out what absolutely has to work. Start there. Maybe that's where you can guide what you're going to automate for. And again, try to limit, to choose the top 6 risks and the top 6 quality aspects to focus on, because we can't do everything. So we need to focus on what's most important. And even if you do an experiment that fails, you learn something. That's good. There's nothing negative about that. So I found that using these visual models really helps you get started. It's like, it can seem so paralyzing. The fear is the bad one for me. It's like, oh, I don't want to have to learn that new tool. Get going together. Maybe part of your strategy is, we're going to pair on automation, or we're going to use ensembles and work together on the automation, because that solves our problem of not everybody has all the skills needed. So we get together, we have all the skills needed. And as you start automating tests and getting them into your continuous integration, you're going to start feeling more confident to release small changes to production more frequently, which also reduces risk, because if you just release one small change and then something goes wrong, you just revert it. You know exactly what caused the problem. And automate the soul crushing work, like going through manual regression checklists, and make time for more valuable human-centric testing activities like accessibility testing, exploratory testing, user experience testing, lots of different things we could be doing. So how can testers help? We have a lot of skills to bring to the party. You know, we're good collaborators, we're good communicators, get people to talk about how should we test this? Can we test it at the unit level? What makes the most sense here? Do we need an end-to-end workflow test here to mitigate our risks? Helping the team learn good testing practices, transferring your knowledge, and asking the good questions. We're great question askers. And we really need to sharpen our facilitation skills so we can get people together, maybe together for ensemble testing sessions, or get together for brainstorming sessions about what test scenarios do we need, how would we automate those. And there are lots of online resources to help you learn lots of skills that would help you. Test Automation University, Ministry of Testing, lots of places to go learn. So baby steps. And remember, don't go overboard. You know, like I say, I've worked on teams that had literally thousands of tests and we still had terrible regression failures in production. You need the minimum automated tests to catch those regression failures and make sure that the things most important to the customer don't break. We mitigate the risks that are important to the business. And the ones that aren't adding value, it's really hard to delete them. Joao Prensa has a great talk on deleting tests. As humans, it's hard for us to get rid of something that we've built ourselves. But we have, you know, at least take them out of the test suite and put them, you know, put them somewhere in our repository where they're not causing us maintenance time. Focus on just highest risks and don't break anything that would ruin the customer's day. So I'll share these slides with Jenna so she can provide them to people, but just some of that could give you a whole bunch of resources here. I do have a blog post series on the Test Guild blog that goes into this more in depth. The Discovery books, the BDD books by Seb Rose and Gaspar Nagy, I think it's bddbooks.com. That's really a great introduction to using examples to guide development. And then there's Toyer's blog post as well. So now with a gratuitous donkey picture, we can do questions and answer. Well, I don't know if I have all the answers. We do questions and talking. So I'll stop sharing.
Lisa, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Let's flip over to the Q&A. And by the way, if you have not put any questions, if you've not put your questions in the Q&A, feel free to do it now or to put them in the chat. Oh, we've got a question already. So what are some of the better UI automation tools that you've used?
Oh gosh, that's a tricky one because it's so, I mean, I really feel like it should be a team decision. Which automation tools, and it depends on, you know, what programming language is your production code, what skills do you have, what needs you have. You know, some of my favorites, oddly enough, I've worked with one team that used Cucumber extensively, but it's always been one of my favorites just because I like the idea of using examples to guide developments, and Cucumber is not an automation tool. The Cucumber developers will tell you it's a test specification tool, which I really like. And they have a really great open source community. If you're interested in contributing to open source, I joined my first new contributors ensemble session with the Cucumbers yesterday. You don't have to have any particular skills. You don't have to have anything installed on your machine. It's all with they have an app that you see that shares the screen, and you can even type in and drive yourself. But I just love their community. It makes a lot of sense. Robot Framework is another one that I've been on a team using Robot Framework. It's more keyword driven approach, still kind of a natural language, but it doesn't use given. Oh, I guess you could use given with them, but it's mainly more of a keyword driven approach. But I like its reporting. I think reporting is really important. If a test breaks, you want to know right away what went wrong. And so that's one of the things we look at. Can it integrate well with whatever continuous integration tool that we're using? So there are a lot of aspects I look at. Some of the tools I've used I don't even know if people use them anymore, like Canoe Web Test and Fitness. Those were some of my favorites back in the early aughts. Not sure what people are using now. RSpec, it's a good one for Ruby if you don't need to have business readable tests. So lots of favorites.
Fitness is still out there, by the way.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, it has not gone away. Let's see. So we've got a couple more questions. What's your opinion of the future of codeless test automation? For instance, so Ryan brought up UFT test complete, which is also Functionize. So we fall in that same category.
Yeah, I worked for Mabel for a while as well. I think codeless is a misleading term. And I don't know about test complete and Functionize. With Mabel, you're going to end up, back when I was working on it anyway, you were going to end up writing some JavaScript. But I think what's the most important, and I love code, I love low code. I prefer to call them low code. I love low code platforms for coding as well, for developing web apps as well. I worked for OutSystems also for a while, which is a really great low code platform. But what's important is you still need to understand good design practices and good patterns. You still need to design maintainable tests. And what I see people doing with some of these tools is they recorded a lot of steps and they end up having a script with like 100 steps going through the user interface. And now the test failed. Well, what failed? There are a whole bunch of things that could have failed because you did so many things. So patterns like one clear purpose per test. These are things we still need to understand, and they're not hard to learn. But that's, again, why it's good to have a whole team approach to this. Is you want your tests to be maintainable. If something breaks, you want to know exactly what broke, and you can decide right away if we need to update the test or we really had a bug. And as far as flaky tests, I have found that when we investigated flaky tests, it turned out there really was a bug, but the bug was just hard to reproduce and didn't reproduce every time. So I think that they're really powerful. What I love about these tools is they do a lot of things for you with one script. You can test performance, you can test visuals. I don't know about Functionize, I haven't used it, but you can test PDFs, you can test email, you can do all of these things in one script, which is great, but as long as it's focused on the same piece of behavior or the same piece of functionality. I love those tools, and I feel like we are moving into a whole new generation of test automation. And it's very exciting.
I agree. Yeah, no, 100%. There is just over the horizon of what we're doing today, something pretty incredible on the other side of it when it comes to automation. I think when it comes to testing and software in general, we're kind of at this precipice of something really cool in the next step.
I agree.
We've got a couple more questions for you. So how do we insert automation tasks into the sprint? Should we do a delayed sprint or actual sprint?
Well, when the whole team is taking on this responsibility, it's part of our work. So for each story, we're going to not only write the production code, but we're going to write the test code and automate those tests. Obviously, for things with a user interface, you have to wait until the user interface is available. However, you can take an approach that makes that easy to do. Janet and I have what we call the steel thread approach. Some people call it a tracer bullet or thin slice. So let's say we have a user interface with 5 steps. Maybe the user's going to like upload a file and answer some questions, or maybe they're registering for a new subscription or something. So we've got 5 steps on our user interface, and a lot of teams that I've been on, we started working on the first screen, we started working on the second screen, and pretty soon like the business wants to release it. Like, well, we still got to do the 5th screen. It's no good to anybody. Instead, let's take 5 screens and just hard code, maybe hard code data on it so that we can make sure it gets in the database. And all we have is navigation. We can go and show that to the product owner and say, is this the flow you had in mind? We can write an automated test that steps through those 5 pages. We can put it in my continuous integration. We've already done some automation. And then subsequent stories flesh that out. Okay, now maybe we add the upload file capability, then maybe we add field validation, then maybe we add, so we keep adding onto it until it's good enough for production. But we're automating as we go, and that makes automation less of a big giant thing. So again, when we work together on it, and maybe there were a lot of tests that could be pushed to the unit level. We don't even have to do them. And the other thing that's really important to remember is you can test the user interface at the unit level as well. There are lots and lots of frameworks that let you do Jest and Jasmine. And it's important for developers to do that. If they're just testing a piece of functionality that's on the screen and doesn't need to go off, they can use test doubles and mock or fake out the interaction with outside components. You can do a lot of your testing with unit level testing, even in the user interface. So again, that's why we need to get the whole team involved with this to be doing things the best way we can and get the fastest feedback we can. But I know it's hard. I know there are a lot of teams out there that automate a sprint behind because they want the UI to be all done. And I always see that as a slippery slope, and it goes in a bad direction over time.
And I have to tell you, as a product owner, tester turned product owner, being able to see something earlier, always a win, because now you're pulling in your product team, your product people to your whole team approach, because they get to give fast feedback too.
Right.
The huge win. Huge win. Advocating for myself for a minute. So I have another question for you, and I'm really excited to have you talk about this one because I actually share your blog post about this probably 4 or 5 times a week.
Oh my.
So any tips on how to incorporate production observability and monitoring and logging into testing?
Did I write a blog post about that?
You wrote the post about shift left, shift right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's this holistic approach that Janet and we like to use the term holistic because Dan Ashby some years ago did his continuous testing model, which is the DevOps loop, which we test here all the way around it. Unfortunately, the term continuous testing has been co-opted to mean only the automated testing in the continuous delivery. And that's not what continuous testing is to me. So we have this holistic testing idea where we're testing all the way around. And I mentioned earlier, our test environments don't look like production, especially nowadays. And we've got this cloud architecture with microservices. It's very hard to replicate everything in production in a test environment. And we don't know what those darn customers are going to do. And there are things, sometimes I heard Sarah Wells on a podcast the other day, I think she's on the Semaphore CI podcast. And she said her team found when they moved to a microservices architecture, trying to do end-to-end workflow tests, automated, just got in their way. It worked against the benefits of the microservices architecture. So they turned to using observability and monitoring, and they're watching their production very closely. They have alerts, they know when something goes wrong, and either they can hot fix it right away or roll it back right away. So we need to have that approach as well. But what Jan and I encourage people to do is, as you're planning your story, what telemetry do you need to capture in there? What data do you need to log so that you can investigate if something goes wrong in production, or know if something went wrong in production? And then as you're building, doing coding for your story, you put the instrumentation in as part of that's one of your coding tasks, and the instrumentation, then you're testing it. Let's look at our Datadog dashboard or whatever we're using against the test environment and make sure that that's working. So just incorporating that as you go along. And testers, a lot of times the teams I've been on, it was a tester who noticed the problem in production, who noticed a spike in a graph and alerted the rest of the team, because we generalizing here, but testers are really good at spotting patterns and anomalies and identifying risks. And so being involved in that side, I think it's really fun too. The last few years, I've really elbowed my way onto the monitoring and observability teams and like, hey, I want to help, because it's kind of a tool assisted exploratory testing in production, if you will. So I don't know if that's, I can't remember specifically the blog post you're talking about. So I hope that's the one you were talking about, Jenna.
It is. I actually put it in the chat for everybody.
Oh, good. Okay.
It's even the one that has your really cool model.
Yeah.
Like
well, it doesn't have the latest one, but it has a version of it. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got another question. This will probably be the last one. Someone asked, which model would you recommend to start with first? And which model would you consider to be the most effective out of the models you mentioned?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I would probably start with the quadrants model because I feel like it's the most basic one. And then let's talk about all the type of testing we need to do. For test automation specifically, I have a great bias because I've used the test automation pyramid for so long. So if I'd have had the bandpass filter model back then, maybe that's the one I would have started with. But I think we all kind of like, let's start with the thing I'm comfortable with. And if that doesn't work, let's branch out and try something else. I've found the automation pyramid worked really well for the teams I was on, but I know it doesn't work for everybody. I do like Toyer's kind of additional thoughts and questions to that, and the idea of looking at the big picture. So I might start with Toyer's model now.
I found Toyer's model to be fascinating. It's actually, I'm surprised, but this is the first time I've seen it. And I really want to dig into it more because I've, in the past, talked to folks about how the automation pyramid is the start of a conversation, but it feels like Toyer's model is almost like one step into the conversation. And I like that. I think it's neat. So.
Yeah, I put a link to our Agile Testing Fellow blog. We got some posts about the holistic testing model.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that wraps things up for today, but I want to give a huge thank you. Lisa, thank you so much for being here with us. It's really an honor to have you on our stage, and I hope you'll join us again sometime.
Well, it's definitely my pleasure, and everybody feel free to get in touch. Lisa Crispin on Twitter, and you can find me on LinkedIn, and just email me, lisa@lisacrispin.com, because I love talking testing with people. And so if you have more questions or want more information, do feel free to get in touch.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.